And if you'll join with me in our sermon reading for the day, Isaiah 49:6. And here's what God speaks for us. He says, "It is too small a thing for you," he's speaking of his servant. We'll see today this is Jesus. "It is too small a thing for you to be my servant to restore simply the tribes of Jacob and bring back those of Israel that I have kept. I will also make you a light for the Gentiles, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth." Amen. Well, as we look at our Advent series, and like I said, I kind of hit that brick wall after 25 years or whatever of trying to preach the Christmas story from some different angle. And I finally said, I'm going to come up with an unconventional Christmas series. And I'm just going to look at scriptures that are not the traditional scriptures of the birth narrative, the birth story, but we're going to find out a lot of great truth about who God is and what God's been at work doing in the life of Jesus, that baby born 2,000 years ago, the Messiah. And today we're going to see a lot dealing with light. And light is a powerful image in Scripture. God's very first words as recorded in Scripture, God's very first act as recorded in Scripture, is over the darkness and the chaos and the disorder, really, before the creation of the world. And God says, "Let there be light," and light comes into being. Light is about God's truth. It's about God's self-revelation. It's about this lighted pathway back to God so that we might know God. God says, "Let there be light." And we see a lot of lights during the Christmas season, don't we? They even have the great times like down here, Wellfield and other places where they light up the big tree and people come and they see all the lights getting lit up. Well, during the Christmas season, Kathy and I have this little game we play as we drive around, and it's called Tasteful or Tacky. And by that is we drive past homes and we say, "Oh, that's tastefully done, the lights." And then we look at others and we go, "Ooh, that's a little tacky," right? Anybody ever seen these before? Like sometimes they really go all out with their lights, and lights are nice. They're a lot of fun, but sometimes it's just a little too much. And I was rereading a story again. This is back from the 1990s, okay? And this was in Arkansas, and the Arkansas Supreme Court ordered a Little Rock resident, his name was Jennings Osborne, to reduce substantially his Christmas light display. And you say, before you get mad about this, I want you to know this was a really, really big display. You see, the neighbors sued because it was so large. And this is what it contained. Basically, there were lights and figures everywhere, 20-foot tall figures all over the place lit up. They think he had 3 million lights that he put up for Christmas. You imagine how long it takes to string those up? You don't like doing the 150 out on your front. I know. 3 million lights. They said they literally needed different kinds of power lines to bring power to his home that they had to set up outside of his home, okay? This brought in tens of thousands of people to come see the lights. And the neighbors finally just said, "That's enough. We're tired of 4 weeks of having thousands of people crowding our small, supposedly quiet suburban homes." And it didn't happen. And so they took him to court, and the Supreme Court said, "You need to reduce substantially these lights." Now, I like Christmas lights. They're awesome. But I understand where those neighbors are coming from, too. I guess the idea then of this is what Christmas is about and the Christmas lights is it's supposed to draw people to God, right? It's supposed to draw people in to see the light of God, to see the hope and the peace and the grace and the love and the salvation of God that's found in Jesus. See, light representing Christmas goes back many centuries. Many, many centuries. I guess the idea is that we celebrate Jesus, the light of God who's come into a darkened world. Or maybe it's like that light, the star, the light that led the Magi, that drew the Magi to go and find Jesus. It's that light and that focus of light. John, as he writes at the beginning of his gospel in chapter 1, he says, "In him Jesus was life, and that life was the light of all of humanity, every person." And he goes on to say, "And the true light that gives light to every person was coming into the world." Not just for some persons, not just for part of the world, not just for a select few, but coming into the world for all persons. And that's powerful as we remember what we hear today. You see, in Isaiah 49, we're going to get a chance once again to hear about God's promise. God's promise to a yearning people who are in darkness saying, we want salvation. We want deliverance, and they're looking for it. Maybe it's once again we get to remember God's servant who came, his preparation, his mission, his purpose, and allow that to rekindle a fire within us. And as we rekindle that fire, I want us to be the bearers of the good news of light, of God's salvation, all the way to the ends of the earth, because that's what Isaiah 49:6 tells us. That's where it was gone. No more boundaries, no more barriers, no more separation. I mean, Jesus' command to his followers in Acts chapter 1, right after his resurrection, after he'd accomplished all the work he'd come to do, he sits with them, he says, you are going to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, to Samaria, and then to where? Anybody remember? The ends of the earth. It is almost for sure, almost certainly that Jesus was thinking of this very passage when he spoke those words. Why do I say that? It's because Luke records in Acts chapter 13 that very same passage which comes out of Isaiah 49. And the followers of Jesus say, and this is what the Lord has commanded us. I have made you a light for the Gentiles that you might bring salvation to the ends of the earth. In other words, Jesus said, it's great to have an identity, the people of God, but the reality is you have a job to do as well. Let's make this happen. So let's take a look at this prophet Isaiah. And I've struggled as to how much you talk about Isaiah here, because Isaiah has 66 chapters. It is a long book. And there's so much stuff that happens in there. And how much background information do you give, or do you just jump right into the passage and say, here's what it means? I don't know. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it, I guess, today. And hopefully it'll be enough that you'll understand kind of what's happening. You see, in Isaiah is a prophet trying to draw the people back to God. He's trying to avert this looming captivity and destruction that is coming because they have not been faithful. And God says, if you're not faithful and do what I ask you to do, bad things are going to happen. But if you do what I ask you to do, I will bless you and all kinds of great things are going to happen. That's just kind of the way it is. Are we obedient or not? They weren't being obedient. They weren't being faithful. And that time did come where the disaster came. Babylon had come in and wiped out the southern half of the nation and Jerusalem. They were all taken away into captivity or killed in the midst of this time. And yet, here these prophetic sayings of Isaiah go out to these people who are in exile going, what happened? What's going on in our lives? And it was still God saying, there's hope. You see, I haven't forgotten about you. It's right here, right in front of you. I'm still going to do amazing and great things. And so here's Isaiah trying to present this to the people. Now, in chapter 49, there's kind of a whole new section in the book. Things kind of change. It changes from Israel as just a nation that's in captivity and bondage, and it starts talking about literally like a moral or spiritual bondage of the whole world. Another aspect of the change is they've been talking about this servant, the servant of God. And if you read through Isaiah, it's kind of confusing because sometimes the servant is the nation of Israel. Sometimes the servant is an individual, this agent of God who's going to come and bring salvation to the ends of the earth. We know that to be Jesus. And it kind of flips back and forth, and you got to pay attention to which one they're talking about. But the reality is this. Here's the nation of Israel, the servant of Israel, of God. God has chosen them. And he's chosen them not because they were so super special, but he's chosen them and said, I'm going to reveal myself to you, and your goal now is to reveal me to the world. You've got a task to do. Yes, you've got an identity. You're the people of God. That's awesome. But you've got a task to carry out still, as I've done this for you. They didn't get it done. And now this servant, the individual, he's going to come and accomplish what Israel, the nation, didn't get done. He's going to bring salvation to the ends of the earth. And that's an amazing thing, and this is what we're talking about today. So as we begin to see this passage out of chapter 49, we have to remember the servant Jesus. It's all about his purpose of why Jesus came. And part of that purpose and the mission and the will of God is, yes, of course, to bring salvation to the ends of the earth, to be this light to the Gentiles and to the ends of the earth. But also, in the middle of that purpose that was given the servant, there's activity that needs to be accomplished. Jesus came to do something, okay? He came to accomplish something. So if you read through verses 1 through 5 of chapter 49 in Isaiah, basically it says things like this: before I was born, the servant says, I was called to a task, to a purpose, to a function to carry this thing out. From my birth, from my womb, God has spoken my name and spoken of what I was called to do. See, there's this whole purpose that moves through this whole thing, a particular time where God was going to cause something to happen. And it's interesting as you move through it, we understand that purpose has a function, and I guess I would call it function over identity. Israel understood their identity. We're the people of God. They understood they had a purpose, but they didn't accomplish it. They didn't carry the thing through to the end. But what we see in Jesus, in this servant, is that he had an identity and he had that purpose, but he also accomplished it. And I think part of the problem for Israel was that they were focused some more on their identity than they were on their purpose to accomplish. They became kind of self-focused. Well, we're the people of God. I mean, we're the children of God. Look at us and who we are. And then they began to look out and they said, well, look at that big, bad, horrible, sinful world of people out there. They're not the people. We're the people of God. And all of a sudden these walls were built. And instead of being this light that reaches out to everyone and says, here's who God is, they went inward and focused inwardly and said, we need to block ourselves away from that horrible mess that's out there. Sadly, I think sometimes that mindset is in the church today. We are the church, the children of God, the people of God, right? Do we celebrate that identity? Yes, we do. And yet in the midst of it, sometimes I think we look out and we go, whew, that's a big, bad, sinful world outside of these walls. Let's just build some nice walls and we can hide out in here and we can say, look at us, we're the children of God. And we forget that we're called to a task, to be a light to the nations, to the ends of the earth. And sometimes we have to understand that the ends of the earth is sometimes our neighbor next door, because it's about tearing down every boundary and every barrier that's out there. So the focus is, how can we be that light as Jesus is the light? See, it's about accomplishing what God would have us to accomplish. As you get to about verse 5, we begin to see clearly this mission of the servant. He says, I've been formed in the womb to restore Israel and bring Israel back. From conception, from birth, the servant existed to do this purpose that God has. But we move to verse 6 and it becomes this powerful thing. We see here God's heart. We see this deeper purpose, this very reason that this baby was born, that this servant came into the world. And God had already told us about it. Like in Isaiah 45, God says, turn to me and be saved, all the ends of the earth. Why? Because I'm God. I'm God. There's no other. You turn to me because there's nobody else to turn to. I am God. So this is who Israel is supposed to say, here is God. You need to turn to God. You see, the task of restoring Israel to himself was not a large enough task for this servant. And this is what Isaiah writes. You will do more than just restore the people of Israel to me, but I'm going to make you a light to the Gentiles to bring my salvation to the ends of the earth. You see, Jesus is of such a nature, such a calling, such a preparation, that he's given a much larger task, the salvation of the world, and to let the world know who God is, to be that light to everyone. I'm giving you as a light to the world. Now, I know that sounds like good news to us, doesn't it? Because I'm guessing most of us, if not all of us here, are not Jewish, and we are Gentiles, and we're very thankful that the light went out to the Gentiles, to the ends of the earth. Anybody thankful for that? Yeah, hey, we're thankful, aren't we? That's good news for us. But I want you to hear it from their perspective, okay? So the prophetic word goes out. not only am I going to restore you, Israel, I'm going to restore Gentiles and the nations of the world. And they're saying, wait a minute here, God. Those Gentiles, those nations of the world are the ones who came in, wiped us out, killed a bunch of us. They took us out into captivity, and now you're telling us that you're going to do good stuff for them too? How do you think they took that? Maybe not quite as well as we take it today. Because I happen to think that more than likely throughout history, there's always been a mentality. Us, them. Anybody ever thought about that? Us, them. We like it when God says, I'm going to do good stuff for us, don't we? Oh, yeah. How do we like it when God says, I'm going to do good stuff for them? Wait a minute, God. That's that horrible, sinful, bad place out there. Them? Yeah. Because I love them, and I want them to know me and to love me. Salvation is for everyone, even to the ends of the earth. Jump ahead 700 years from the time that this was written. 500 years have gone by since Babylon came in, wiped out Jerusalem and everything else. They've come back, they've rebuilt the city, they've rebuilt the temple, they're living there. They're still kind of under bondage because Rome still is the one who's in charge and ruling them. And there's this young Jewish teenage girl, her soon-to-be Jewish husband. They live on the very edge of the known world, and she gives birth to this son. And as she gives birth to this son on the 8th day, it's their religious upbringing and tradition is that they would bring this child to the temple and have a special sacrifice there. And as they bring this child there, this man who we find out is there, and he's a devout person, and he is spirit-led, and he's spirit-filled, and he's been praying, and God said, you're going to see the Messiah before you die, and he's like, really? That's awesome. So he's just waiting for the Messiah to come, and the Spirit one day says, you now go to the temple. The Messiah's there. And he goes to the temple and he sees him carrying in this baby, and he takes the baby in his arms. And this is what he says, O sovereign Lord, as you have promised, you may now dismiss your servant in peace, because my eyes have seen your salvation, which you prepared in the sight of all nations, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and the glory for your people here. He's for everybody. And he proclaims it and he declares it. This one is for everyone right here. You see, it's regardless of your national identity, regardless of your ethnic identity, regardless of your race or your color or your persuasion or your position or your status or your class or your gender. Jesus has come to reconcile everyone. Jesus has come to redeem all persons. Jesus has come to restore all persons to a relationship with God. Do you believe this? I mean, do you really believe this? Because if you really believe this, then my next question is, what are you doing about it? Oh, that kind of belief. That I actually have to do something? Yeah. A light to all the world, to the ends of the earth, to all the nations. You know, that baby, that Christmas light, grew up. And as he grew up, he declared in John 8, I'm the light of the world. He declared in Matthew 5, guess what? You, my followers, are the light of the world. The light. See, this Christmas, could we remember that as we celebrate the light, we celebrate and remember what his purpose and mission and activity was, to be a light for all people. And then we can make this new commitment in our lives to be the people who are the light. I truly mean this. Folks, you could be the light to a person in darkness right now. I mean, all around us, you could be the one person who is light into their life. Could we this Advent season say, yes, I will be a light to someone who needs me? I will do it. Even if it's just one person, you could be the lighthouse in someone's storm. And I know you say, well, Jesus is the light. I'm not sure how I fit in. Let me give you a great example here. You ready? Anybody ever seen one of those before? This lighthouse. Now, depending on the height, most of them are about the same height where they build them up, they put them up here. A lighthouse's light can be seen up to about 20 nautical miles. It would be a little bit more because it's very bright, but the curvature of the earth keeps it from being able to be up so high that you could see it actually. 20 nautical miles. The beam shoots a long distance, not because the bulb is so incredibly bright, and it is, but it is surrounded. Now listen to this. The bulb is surrounded by dozens of small prisms that help intensify and focus the light. See, the prisms do not generate the light. They reflect the light and they direct the light. And that enables the bulb to shine far beyond what it would be able to by itself. Anybody catching where I'm going with this yet? Guess what we are? We're like the prisms. We're not the light, but we know and we love the light, and the light is a part of us. And Jesus says, now you are the light. Reflect me to a world who needs to know, because this is what I've come to do, a light for all. The light of the world stepped out into this dark world, and now we begin to reflect that light in the darkness. And I truly believe the more that we are transformed into Jesus' image, the more that we reflect Jesus in the light, it'll be shown in our words, in our character, and in our actions. Because this is our purpose. I'm going to read to you just a little thing here as we finish. I like this because this is Mark Roberts, and he's talking about this passage, and I just like what he says. He says, no matter how insignificant you might feel, you are nevertheless God's light in this world. Did you know that? You're God's light. Your task, according to Jesus, is to let your light shine, to live so that others might be drawn to the light of Christ that's in you. As God spoke through Isaiah to the servant, way back there in chapter 49, so I think he would say to you, it is not enough that you have received salvation through the light of the world. Now share it with others. Live in such a way that your family, your friends, your co-workers, your neighbors, your classmates see the light of Christ in you. It's not enough that you get your own spiritual needs met, or even that you grow in personal faith. You are called to minister and to serve and to share the love of Christ and the light of Christ with others. To be a witness wherever you are. This is your function. This is your purpose. This is your activity. I believe that God would speak similarly to our church, he says, to this body of believers in Jesus. As a family of God, we share life together. We love one another. We worship together. We're helping each other grow in Christ, and these are right and essential to our life as a church. But God has more for us. We are to be a light to the city, a beacon of hope and faith in a world that is filled with despair and brokenness and doubt. And as God would say through Isaiah to the servant back in chapter 49, I think he would say the same thing to us. It is not enough that you gather to worship me or to love one another. I have placed you in the city to be a light to your community, reflect my love to your neighbors. Let my truth shine through, because this is your function and your purpose and your activity. Could we this Advent say, here I am, God. I'm just surrendering myself to you so that I can be a light. Show me who I can be a light to in these next weeks, and let the light of Christ shine through me, that their lives might be changed. That's us. Could we do it?